In the spring of 1875, the hills along the southern border of the Arizona Territory were quiet in a way that unsettled even seasoned men. The land there rose in long, empty, folds-low ridges of scrub and stone, broken only by dry arroyos and the occasional mesquite. At night, the darkness settled early and completely. There were no towns for miles, no rail lines yet pushing through, only patrol routes, marked more by habit than by maps. The men assigned to these routes were not yet called border patrols in any formal sense. They were customs, guards, cavalry, auxiliaries, and civilian trackers contracted by the territorial government. Their work was routine, watching for smugglers, escorting surveyors, keeping an eye on cattle trails across the line between nations with little regard for law. Journals from Fort Lowell and scattered entries in regional newspapers described the work as monotonous, long hours, sparse conversation, nights spent counting stars to pass the time. Among the men stationed that year were Corporal James H. Ellery, a former cavalryman, Miguel Ortega, a local guide familiar with the hills since childhood, and Thomas Reed, a customs clerk who kept careful notes, believing written records brought order to remote places. Their patrol sector lay west of the San Pedro River, an area locals referred to simply as the Empty Hills. Travelers avoided it when possible, not because of danger, but because there was nothing there. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The patrols followed their usual rhythm: daylight rides, dusk check-ins, night watches from low vantage points. Campfires were kept small. Sound carried far in that country, and the men learned to listen more than they spoke. It was during one of these ordinary watches, late in April, that the first remark was made, almost in passing. Red noted it in his journal, without emphasis. Ortega asked tonight whether I saw a light on the North Ridge. I told him no. He said perhaps his eyes were tired. No alarm was raised. No report filed. A week later, Ellery mentioned something similar while breaking camp. A pale glow, he said, far off and low, moving where no camp should be. He dismissed it himself before anyone else could, reflected Starlight. A lantern from smugglers farther south. Distance played tricks on the eye. Still, the comments began to repeat. In letters sent back to Fort Lowell, one patrolman wrote of odd lights on the hills, not steady, not fixed, though he added that they caused no concern and vanished before proper observation. The men continued their work. They joked about tired eyes and long nights. Ortega crossed himself once, quietly, when he thought no one was watching. What made the sightings unsettling was not their brightness, but their restraint. The lights did not flare or flicker wildly. They moved slowly, deliberately, always far enough away to resist inspection, and always where no road, no homestead, and no known trail existed. By early May, Red underlined a single sentence in his journal, something he had not done before. The hills are empty in daylight. At night, they do not seem so. At the time, it was merely an observation. Nothing had happened yet. But the routine was beginning to fray, quietly like a thread pulled just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be stopped. The first incident that could not be dismissed occurred on the night of May 11, 1875. It was a clear evening, with little wind and no moon. The patrol had taken position along a low rise, overlooking the northern hills, an elevated point they often used to scan for movement along cattle routes. Visibility was considered good by local standards. The stars were sharp, the horizon clean. Shortly after the second watch began, Ortega was the first to speak. He did not point. He did not raise his voice. According to Reed's later notes, Ortega simply said, "There. It has returned this time." All three men saw it. The light appeared along the slope of a distant hillow, pale and steady. It did not resemble a campfire. There was no smoke, no flicker, no sudden flare when the wind shifted. It held a consistent brightness, closer to white than yellow. Ellery estimated its distance at several miles, far enough that even a mounted party could not reach it quickly, yet close enough that its movement could be followed. And it was moving, not rising, not falling, moving laterally along the contour of the hill, at a slow and even pace. Reed wrote that it reminded him of a lantern carried by a man who knew exactly where he was going. The men attempted, immediately, to explain it. Then, travelers. Then a distant homestead, newly settled, and not yet marked on any map. Ellery ordered the fire extinguished and observed through field glasses. The light did not change. It did not respond to darkness. It did not waver. After several minutes, it did something unexpected, descended. Not suddenly, but carefully, slipping down the far side of the hill until it disappeared from view. No echo followed. No sound of hooves or voices carried on the night air. The men waited. Nearly an hour passed without further sighting. The watch resumed, tense but controlled. No report was made that night. Ellery believed it unwise to elevate an uncertain observation. But before dawn, it returned. This time, there were two. They appeared in different positions, separated by distance, yet similar in color and intensity. One emerged near the previous location, the other farther east, closer to an area known to be entirely untraveled. They did not move together. One remained fixed, while the other drifted slowly upward, as though climbing the hill without a visible path. Reed recorded that this ascent took several minutes, too slow for a flare, too controlled for reflected starlight. Ortega whispered a prayer. Ellery told him to be quiet. When the sun finally rose, the hills were unchanged. No tracks were found later that morning. No ashes, no sign of passage. Still, the men weren't easy. That day, Ellery ordered the patrol routes adjusted slightly, not out of fear, but caution. Reed was instructed to keep more detailed notes. Ortega said little, though he refused to camp in certain low areas as night approached. By the end of the week, similar lights were reported by another patrol operating miles to the west. Their description matched closely. Slow movement, no sound, no visible source. Each explanation seemed reasonable on its own. Together, they began to conflict. What disturbed the men most was not what the lights were, but how calmly they behaved, as though following routes that existed only after dark. And for the first time, someone suggested that the hills might be watched as closely as they were being watched themselves. No one argued. They simply waited for night to return. By late May, the sightings were no longer isolated. Patrol schedules from Fort Lowell show an increase in written remarks brief, careful notes appended to otherwise routine logs. The language remained restrained, but the frequency changed. Where once there had been a single mention in a week, now there were several, often from different men who had not spoken to one another beforehand. The lights were appearing on consecutive nights, not always in the same location, but always within the same stretch of hills. Sometimes one, sometimes two. On one occasion, Reed recorded 3 set apart like distant camps, yet unaccompanied by smoke or sound. The men altered their behavior without formally acknowledging why. Watches were doubled. Conversations grew shorter after dusk. Rifles were kept closer at hand, though no order had been given to do so. When the lights appeared, no one spoke at all. Ellery attempted methodical observation. Distances were estimated. Bearings noted. Time measured. He sketched the ridgelines in the dirt and marked where the lights appeared relative to known landmarks. The results offered no clarity. The lights did not adhere to trails. They crossed inclines at angles a rider would avoid. They appeared where a man on foot would struggle, yet moved with an ease that suggested familiarity with the terrain. One night, as the patrol watched from a ridge, a light appeared below them, closer than any before. It was not sudden. It simply became visible, as though uncovered. Ellery later stated that it was no more than the height of a man above the ground, and that its brightness did not increase with proximity. It remained steady, almost subdued. The men froze, expecting sound. There was none. The light moved along the base of the hill, following the curve of the land, then stopped. It remained stationary for several minutes. Red noted that during this time, Ortega refused to look directly at it. Then, without dimming or flaring, it receded, drawing away into the darkness until it was indistinguishable from the stars. That was the first night the patrol failed to sleep. Rational explanations were still offered, but they grew strained. Someone suggested phosphorescent gases, though no one could explain their movement. Another mentioned distant signal lamps, but there were no settlements to signal Torah from. Ellery sent a guarded report to his superior, careful not to overstate what he could not prove. The response, preserved in a copied letter, advised him to remain attentive, but not alarm the men. The advice came too late. By early June, the lights began to appear even when the patrol moved camp. No matter the route taken, no matter the ridge chosen, the lights found the empty hills again. What unsettled the men most was a growing impression, not spoken aloud, but shared, that the lights were not random. They appeared at similar hours. They followed similar contours. They never approached the camp directly, yet never strayed far enough to be ignored. It was Ortega who finally voiced what the others had only thought. According to Reed's journal, he said quietly, "They move as if the ground remembers them." No one answered. That night, the lights did not retreat before dawn. They remained visible until the first pale light of morning washed the hills bare, once more empty, silent, and offering no trace of what had crossed them in the dark. The night of June 9, 1875, was recorded differently than the others. Reed's handwriting grew uneven. Ellery's after-action note, written days later, contained fewer measurements and more pauses than usual. Ortega refused to add his name to any account at all. The patrol had moved farther south than normal, hoping distance might settle whatever pattern had taken hold in the hills. What mattered more was their placement. They formed no clear line, no recognizable route. Instead, they seemed to occupy the surrounding hills evenly, as if marking the perimeter of the basin itself. No one spoke. The lights did not move at first. They held their positions steady and quiet for long minutes. There was no wind. The horses, tethered nearby, grew restless without obvious cause. As though the motion were being answered. Reed wrote, "They did not approach us, yet they did not withdraw. They changed places, time passed, without measure. No one checked a watch." At some point, none of the men later agreed exactly when the lights began to move in sequence. One would fade slightly, not extinguish, while another brightened elsewhere. The effect was not dramatic, but it was unmistakable. Attention was being directed. Ortega broke first. He stood abruptly and called out, not in English, but in Spanish, his voice low and strained. The words were not recorded. Reed only noted that Ortega's voice did not carry far, as though the night absorbed it. Nothing answered. Ellery ordered him to sit down. His command sounded distant, even to himself. Then, for the first time since the sightings began, a light changed speed. One of them crossed a slope faster than before, abruptly, but with purpose. It moved from one ridge to another in less time than any previous observation allowed. Still no sound followed. The men reached for their rifles, not to aim, but to hold. Reed later described a sensation difficult to define, though the hills were no longer empty, but occupied by intention rather than form. The lights did not come closer. They did not reveal themselves. Instead, one by one, they descended behind the hills and vanished not, all at once, but in careful order, leaving the basin darker than it had been before. The patrol remained awake until sunrise. At dawn, Ellery ordered an immediate return to Fort Lowell. abandoning the planned route without explanation. No tracks were found, no scorched ground, no marks of any kind. Yet none of the men argued the decision. Something had shifted that night, not in what was seen, but in what was understood. The hills had not revealed anything. They had only made it clear that whatever moved across them did not do so by accident. The return to Fort Lowell was quiet. No one spoke of the lights on the ride back, though the men remained alert even in daylight, scanning ridges that now showed only stone and scrub. The hills looked ordinary, again excessively so. Reed noted that this normalcy felt incorrect, like a stage after the actors have gone. Ellery filed his report within 24 hours. It was measured, careful, and incomplete. He described repeated nocturnal lights of unknown origin, consistent in appearance and movement, observed by multiple men over several weeks. He avoided speculation. He included sketches, times, and distances, but omitted the Basin incident entirely. Privately, the men reacted in different ways, or take a requested reassignment. When asked why, he gave no reason beyond saying he would not return to that sector at night. The request was granted without comment. He left the fort within days and did not speak of the hills again, even to those he had known for years. Reed continued writing. His journal entries from June grew longer and more reflective. He questioned his own perceptions, reread earlier notes, and compared them against patrol logs from other units. He found similar language in two separate records phrases describing lights that moved as if guide and did not behave like flame. This troubled him more than the sightings themselves. Ellery, for his part, altered procedures. Patrol routes through the empty hills were reduced. Night watches were shortened. When questioned, he cited efficiency and the absence of confirmed smuggling activity. No official explanation was offered, but word spread quietly among the men. New assignments avoided the region when possible. Older hands advised caution without elaboration. The lights did not appear again that season. Whether this was due to chance, altered patrol routes, or something else entirely, was never determined. By midsummer, attention shifted to more immediate concerns: heat supply shortages, conflicts elsewhere along the territory. Yet the impact remained. Reed wrote of disturbed sleep and an inability to dismiss what he had seen. Ellery became reluctant to patrol at night, a change noted by his superiors, though never formally addressed. Most telling were the small choices: maps left uncorrected, routes left unused, questions left unasked. The hills returned to their reputation as empty, but among those who had watched them in silence, the word no longer carried the same meaning. Something had passed through that place, or perhaps continued to do so without leaving a trace, and without offering itself to understanding. And for men accustomed to measuring land by what it contained, that absence lingered more heavily than any discovery. By the end of 1875, the lights had slipped quietly into the margins of record. No formal investigation was opened. No directive was issued. The patrol logs from Fort Lowell returned to their usual concerns: weather supplies, livestock movement, routine crossings. The empty hills appeared only as place names, stripped again of comment. What remained existed in fragments. Reed's journal was never published. It survived only because it was stored among his personal effects after his death, years later. Its pages thin and carefully dated. The final mention of the lights appears in late June, a single line written without elaboration. Nothing more has been seen. This does not feel like an ending. Ellery never revised his official report. When questioned informally in later years by a territorial clerk compiling border histories, he acknowledged the sightings but declined to expand on them. He reportedly said only that some things are observed, not resolved. Newspapers from the period contained brief, easily overlooked notices per graphs, describing curious lights or unaccountable glows seen by patrols and travelers in remote districts. None lingered on the subject. No follow-up appeared. The items were printed, read once, and forgotten. Oral accounts persisted longer. Local guides spoke quietly of Los Lucis that crossed the hills after dark, avoiding camps and vanishing with the dawn. The stories varied in detail and restraint, but shared a common feature. No attempt was made to explain them. They were treated as occurrences, not omens. Over time, even these accounts thinned. Routes changed. Settlements expanded elsewhere. The empty hills remained largely untouched, but no longer watched as closely. Later survey maps marked them as unremarkable terrain. There were no conclusions to draw. No evidence was ever produced beyond testimony. No explanation proved sufficient, yet none could be ruled out entirely. The lights left nothing behind, no marks, no sounds, no confirmation of purpose or origin, only the record of men who saw them briefly and chose their words with care. What is most striking, in the end, is not what the patrols claimed, but what they refused to claim. They did not ascribe danger. They did not speak of pursuit or revelation. They did not insist on meaning. They recorded movement, pattern, presence, and then, just as carefully, they allowed the matter to fade. The hills remained. At night, they returned to darkness, and whatever once crossed them did so without witness, again leaving behind only the quiet suggestion that not all landscapes are empty, even when they appear to be.